There's a hidden epidemic happening right now that affects 73% of adults' anxiety, driven by personalized digital algorithms that serve us content faster than our brains can process. In 2025, algorithms deliver roughly 11 million bits of information per second, while our conscious minds can only handle about 40, creating entirely new patterns of overthinking and mental overwhelm. But here's the twist. Dr. Julie Smith discovered that the same psychological principles that help us laugh at our problems can actually rewire our response to digital stress. A simple joke before bedtime outperforms most mindfulness apps for anxiety relief. What she revealed about finding humor in our collective mental health struggle will change how you think about modern anxiety. Dr. Smith discovered something remarkable when she started tracking her patients' anxiety patterns. The algorithmic anxiety epidemic nobody talks about. Her findings revealed a pattern that affects up to 35% of adults according to recent WHO surveys on digital stress, a condition that didn't exist even 5 years ago. This isn't your standard social media stress or digital fatigue. It's something far more complex and frankly more disturbing when you understand what's actually happening inside our heads. Your brain can only focus on a tiny fraction of digital data served every moment, leading to constant decision fatigue. Every notification, every recommended video, every suggested purchase represents a micro-decision that your brain has to evaluate. The result is a constant state of low-level decision fatigue that most people can't even identify. Dr. Smith noticed her patients describing feelings they couldn't name. They felt restless but couldn't pinpoint why. They experienced decision paralysis over simple choices like what to eat for lunch or which route to take to work. Most tellingly, they reported feeling like their thoughts weren't entirely their own. One patient told her, "I'll have an idea for dinner, but then I wonder if I only thought of that because I saw an ad yesterday, and then I start questioning whether any of my preferences are actually mine." The psychological cost goes deeper than most people realize. When you live in an environment where algorithms predict your behavior more accurately than you can predict it yourself, your sense of personal agency starts to erode. Amazon knows what you'll buy before you do. Netflix queues up shows you didn't know you wanted to watch. Spotify creates playlists that feel personally curated but are mathematically generated. Your phone suggests responses to text messages that sound exactly like something you would say. This creates a unique form of overthinking that Dr. Smith calls recursive self-doubt. People don't just second-guess their choices anymore. They question whether their preferences, their thoughts, and even their emotional responses are authentic or artificially influenced. Stay tuned to see how humor rewires these loops in minutes. Traditional anxiety management techniques often fail spectacularly with algorithmic anxiety because they were developed for human-generated stressors, not machine-generated ones. Breathing exercises help when you're worried about a presentation or a difficult conversation. They're less effective when your nervous system is responding to the unpredictable patterns of an algorithm designed to capture and hold your attention at any cost. Dr. Smith started documenting what she calls algorithm paranoia after noticing how frequently it appeared in her practice. Patients would describe elaborate theories about how their devices were listening to them, tracking their emotions, or manipulating their behavior. The unsettling part is that many of their theories are actually true. Their phones do listen. Their emotional states are tracked through typing patterns, voice analysis, and even heart rate data from wearable devices. Their behavior is being manipulated by systems designed to maximize engagement and profit. Consider Sarah, a marketing executive who came to Dr. Smith convinced she was losing her mind. She'd catch herself having conversations that felt scripted, using phrases she'd never used before. She'd find herself wanting products she'd never heard of until they appeared in her social media feed. Most disturbing, she'd started having dreams about people she'd never met but whose content she'd been consuming online. The boundary between her own thoughts and the algorithmically curated information she consumed daily had become so blurred she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Or take Marcus, a college student who developed what he called choice anxiety. Every decision felt simultaneously crucial and meaningless. Should he major in computer science because he was genuinely interested, or because every platform he used had been showing him coding tutorials and tech industry content? When he felt attracted to someone, he wondered if it was because they resembled people in content the algorithm had been serving him. He started making random choices just to feel like he had free will, ordering food he didn't want and taking classes he wasn't interested in. The most disturbing cases involve people who seem completely immune to algorithmic anxiety. Dr. Smith found these individuals fall into two categories: those who have completely surrendered to algorithmic guidance and find it comforting, and those who have developed sophisticated mental filters that most people lack. The first group worries her more than the anxious patients because they've essentially outsourced their decision-making to machines without recognizing the psychological cost. What makes algorithmic anxiety particularly insidious is how it mimics rational thinking. When you question whether your preferences are your own, that seems like healthy self-reflection. When you notice patterns in your behavior that align with your digital consumption, that appears to be good self-awareness. But when this questioning becomes constant and circular, it transforms into a new form of rumination that traditional therapy techniques struggle to address. The algorithms themselves are designed to create what Dr. Smith calls optimal uncertainty. They provide just enough unpredictability to keep you engaged, while maintaining enough pattern recognition to feel somewhat in control. It's the psychological equivalent of a slot machine, but one that operates across every aspect of your digital life. Your brain stays in a constant state of anticipation, never quite knowing what's coming next, but always expecting something. Dr. Smith's research revealed that people experiencing algorithmic anxiety show measurably different brain activity patterns than those with traditional anxiety disorders. Their neural pathways associated with decision-making fire more frequently, but with less resolution. They're constantly processing choices without reaching satisfying conclusions. Their brains work harder but accomplish less, creating a state of mental exhaustion that feels both familiar and completely foreign. The economic implications are staggering. Companies spend billions perfecting algorithms that can predict and influence human behavior with unprecedented accuracy. The more successful these systems become, the more they erode the very sense of personal autonomy that mental health depends on. We're living through a massive psychological experiment where the subjects don't know they're participating, and the experimenters are primarily interested in profit rather than well-being. The reason you feel anxious scrolling social media isn't just FOMO or social comparison. It's your brain detecting that your attention is being manipulated by forces you can't see or control, and your natural psychological defenses are firing in response to that manipulation. But what Dr. Smith discovered next explains why this response goes much deeper than most people realize, why your most primitive survival instincts are treating your phone like a genuine threat to your existence. Why your brain thinks TikTok is trying to kill you. The mechanism behind this response reveals something disturbing about how social media platforms operate. Dr. Smith discovered that the amygdala interprets the rapid content switching of social media feeds as environmental instability. Every swipe triggers a micro fight-or-flight response. Your nervous system doesn't understand that you're safely scrolling through videos of dancing teenagers and cooking hacks. It only knows that your environment is changing unpredictably every few seconds, which in evolutionary terms signal potential danger. This isn't metaphorical. When you scroll through TikTok, your amygdala fires in patterns that mirror those seen in people facing actual uncertainty. The content changes so rapidly that your brain can't establish a baseline of safety. 1 second you're watching a funny cat video, the next it's a news clip about global conflict, followed by someone's breakfast, then a conspiracy theory, then a dance challenge. Your ancient survival system treats each content switch as a potential environmental change that requires immediate assessment and response. The cruel irony becomes clear when you understand how these algorithms actually work. Platforms exploit dopamine pathways that evolved to help humans survive and reproduce, but they do so in ways that create addictive anxiety loops rather than genuine pleasure. Your brain releases dopamine not when you receive a reward, but when you anticipate one. Algorithms have perfected the art of keeping you in a constant state of anticipation without ever fully satisfying that craving. Every scroll represents a gamble. Will the next video be funny, shocking, boring, or personally relevant? Your brain stays locked in anticipation mode, flooding your system with dopamine in preparation for a payoff that may or may not come. This creates what Dr. Smith calls a neurological slot machine, where your reward system is constantly activated but rarely satisfied. Algorithms know and predict your behaviors so well that they can manipulate your attention with the same precision as casino games, except you're gambling with your mental energy instead of money. Who studies from 2025 show that high social media use correlates with a 25% spike in anxiety disorders, particularly among users who report feeling trapped in scrolling cycles. Platforms designed to entertain us have accidentally created a state of chronic hypervigilance that would have been adaptive 50,000 years ago, but is devastating today. Your nervous system remains on high alert, scanning for threats and opportunities in an environment that presents neither genuine danger nor genuine reward. This explains why people report feeling simultaneously bored and overstimulated after scrolling sessions. Your brain becomes exhausted from constant threat assessment and reward anticipation. Every piece of content triggers a complex neurological evaluation. Is this dangerous? Is this useful? Should I remember this? Should I share this? Should I care about this? Your prefrontal cortex works overtime trying to process information that has no real relevance to your actual life or survival. The unpredictable reward schedule creates digital stress patterns identical to those found in gambling addiction. Your heart rate increases, your cortisol levels spike, your attention narrows to focus exclusively on the screen. But unlike traditional stressors that have clear beginnings and endings, social media stress compounds continuously. There's no natural conclusion to a scrolling session, no moment when your brain receives the signal that the threat assessment period is over. Dr. Smith noticed that patients described a peculiar form of anxiety where they feel restless without their phones but anxious with them. This contradiction makes perfect sense when you understand what's happening neurologically. Without their devices, people experience withdrawal from the constant dopamine stimulation their brains have adapted to expect. With their devices, they experience the stress of continuous threat assessment and anticipation management. They're caught between the discomfort of understimulation and the exhaustion of overstimulation. The anxiety becomes self-perpetuating because your brain starts to associate the physical act of holding your phone with the stress response. Even before you open an app, your nervous system begins preparing for the unpredictable content switching that's about to begin. Your body tenses, your breathing becomes shallow, your focus narrows, you're physiologically gearing up for battle against an enemy that doesn't exist. This creates what Dr. Smith calls phantom threat syndrome. Your survival system stays activated even when no actual threats are present. You check your phone compulsively not because you expect to find something important, but because your brain has learned that the absence of stimulation feels dangerous. The silence between notifications triggers the same neural pathways that once alerted your ancestors to environmental changes. This constant threat treadmill hijacks your day and your nights. The most disturbing aspect is how this affects your ability to experience genuine pleasure and relaxation. When your reward system is constantly stimulated by artificial inputs, natural rewards like conversation, nature, or physical activity register as insufficient. Your brain develops a tolerance to normal levels of stimulation. Activities that once felt engaging now seem boring, compared to the hyperstimulation of algorithmic content. Teenagers and young adults show the most severe symptoms because their prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until age 25. They lack the neurological equipment to regulate their responses to these artificial stimulation patterns. Their brains are essentially being hijacked during the most crucial period of neural development, creating patterns that may persist throughout their lives. But Dr. Smith discovered something remarkable about humor's role in interrupting these anxiety loops. Laughter literally changes brain chemistry in ways that counteract the stress response triggered by social media consumption. When you laugh, your brain releases endorphins that counteract cortisol and adrenaline. More importantly, genuine laughter requires cognitive flexibility that breaks the narrow focus created by algorithmic anxiety. Your phone anxiety isn't weakness or lack of willpower. It's your ancient survival system working overtime in a digital world that triggers every evolutionary alarm your brain possesses. Your anxiety is actually evidence that your protective mechanisms are functioning exactly as they should. They're just responding to artificial threats that require solutions your ancestors never needed. And nowhere is this more evident than in what should be your most restorative hours. The sleep revolution that never happened. Despite decades of sleep research promising better rest, 2025 marks the worst sleep quality in human history. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine reports that sleep anxiety has surged to unprecedented levels, particularly among younger generations who grew up with smartphones. We have more sleep apps, smart mattresses, and sleep tracking devices than ever before, yet people are sleeping worse than their grandparents did without any technology at all. The culprit isn't what most experts predicted. It's not shift work, caffeine, or even general stress. It's content designed to keep you watching past bedtime that has learned to exploit our circadian rhythms for profit. Streaming algorithms have become sophisticated enough to serve content that specifically disrupts natural sleep patterns to maximize engagement. A Mount Sinai AI sleep study from 2025 shows algorithms increase the risk of disrupted rest by 2.57 times compared to traditional media consumption. The platforms don't just recommend shows you might enjoy. They analyze your viewing patterns, identify when you typically go to bed, and queue up content designed to keep you watching past your usual bedtime. Your sleep schedule becomes collateral damage in the battle for your attention. The latest 2025 sleep science reveals that recent studies show content stimulation disrupts sleep more than screen light alone. Researchers focused on screen brightness and color temperature while missing the real problem: cognitive stimulation from personalized content. Your brain doesn't stay awake because of the light from your screen. It stays awake because the content is specifically chosen to activate your neural reward pathways, and curiosity loops right when your circadian rhythm is trying to wind down for sleep. Traditional blue light filters and night mode settings provide a false sense of security. You can wear blue light blocking glasses and use dark mode on every device, but if you're consuming content designed to keep you watching past bedtime, your brain remains in an active processing state that's incompatible with sleep. The cognitive load of personalized content overrides your natural circadian signals more effectively than any amount of blue light exposure. AI has created what Dr. Smith calls sleep procrastination, where algorithms know exactly what content will make you stay up just 5 more minutes. The platforms have identified the psychological triggers that make people delay sleep: fear of missing out on trending topics, curiosity about unresolved storylines, social validation through comments and likes, and the anxiety of disconnecting from the continuous stream of information. They serve content that hits these triggers precisely when your sleep drive should be strongest. The algorithm learns your personal vulnerability patterns. It knows you're more likely to keep scrolling when you see content about your specific interests, people you follow, or topics you've engaged with before. It serves this personalized content in carefully timed doses that reset your intention to sleep every few minutes. You start to close the app, but then you see something that seems important or interesting, and suddenly you're back in the engagement loop. Poor sleep creates a vicious cycle that makes tired brains more susceptible to algorithmic manipulation. When you're sleep deprived, your prefrontal cortex functions at reduced capacity. This is the brain region responsible for impulse control, decision-making, and resistance to temptation. Tired brains have less ability to resist the pull of content designed to keep you watching past bedtime, and are more likely to make impulsive choices about continuing to consume media when they should be sleeping. Sleep-deprived people also show increased sensitivity to the reward pathways that social media platforms exploit. Your brain becomes more reactive to likes, comments, and social validation when you're tired. The dopamine hits feel more intense because your baseline mood is lower. This makes you more likely to stay engaged with social media content that provides temporary mood boosts, even though the stimulation prevents the deep sleep your brain needs to recover. Dr. Smith made a surprising discovery about people who laugh before bed. They sleep significantly better because humor releases tension and resets stress hormones. Laughter triggers the release of endorphins that counteract cortisol and adrenaline, the stress hormones that keep your nervous system activated when you're trying to sleep. Genuine laughter also requires cognitive flexibility that breaks the narrow focus created by scrolling through social media feeds. The physiological effects of humor before bed work against the stress response created by consuming content designed to keep you watching past bedtime. When you laugh, your heart rate decreases, your breathing deepens, and your muscle tension releases. These are exactly the opposite of the physiological changes created by engaging with stimulating digital content right before sleep. Humor essentially functions as a natural reset button for your nervous system. In 2025, our relationship with sleep has become another source of anxiety rather than restoration. People don't just struggle with falling asleep or staying asleep. They experience anxiety about their sleep quality, worry about the effects of poor sleep on their health and performance, and feel guilty about their inability to maintain consistent sleep schedules. Sleep tracking apps and devices often worsen this anxiety by providing detailed data about sleep quality that makes people more self-conscious about their rest. Some people can scroll endlessly and still sleep while others lie awake ruminating because of differences in their neural sensitivity to stimulation and their ability to compartmentalize digital experiences. People with naturally lower baseline arousal can consume more stimulating content without it interfering with sleep. Others have brains that continue processing digital information long after they've stopped actively consuming it. The practical solutions that work with our psychology rather than against it focus on changing the content and timing of digital consumption rather than eliminating technology entirely. Dr. Smith recommends creating boundaries around content designed to keep you watching past bedtime in the hours before sleep, while allowing for more predictable, less stimulating digital activities that don't trigger curiosity loops or emotional activation. So try a 90-minute cutoff before bed. Your brain will thank you. The reason you can't sleep isn't just screen time. It's because algorithms have weaponized your curiosity against your circadian rhythm, turning your natural desire to learn and connect into a tool for capturing your attention when your brain should be preparing for rest. But sleep disruption is just one symptom of a much larger problem with how artificial intelligence has fundamentally altered human motivation itself. How AI killed motivation and made us all lazy perfectionists. The most motivated people in 2025 are also the most paralyzed by perfectionism, and artificial intelligence deserves the blame. Dr. Smith observed this paradox repeatedly in her practice. Clients would arrive with detailed productivity systems, multiple AI-powered apps for goal tracking, and elaborate plans for self-improvement. They had all the tools for success, but couldn't actually start working on anything meaningful. They spent more time optimizing their systems than using them, more energy planning perfect workflows than executing imperfect ones. AI productivity tools promised to make us more efficient, but instead created analysis paralysis and comparison anxiety on a scale we've never seen before. Every task management app presents infinite options for categorization, prioritization, and optimization. People spend hours setting up systems that could theoretically handle any possible scenario, instead of just writing down what they need to do tomorrow. The tools designed to reduce cognitive load actually increase it by offering so many ways to organize and optimize that the act of choosing becomes overwhelming. These systems also create what Dr. Smith calls productivity theater. People feel productive while organizing their digital tools, customizing their dashboards, and reading about optimization techniques, but they're not actually producing anything of value. The dopamine hit from organizing and planning feels similar to the satisfaction of completing actual work, so brains start substituting preparation for execution. You can spend an entire day feeling busy and accomplished while completing zero meaningful tasks. The comparison problem becomes worse when you realize that AI recommendation algorithms show us only the best examples of everything. Your LinkedIn feed displays the most polished professional updates. YouTube serves you tutorials from experts who have spent years perfecting their skills. Instagram shows you the most aesthetic examples of hobbies, workspaces, and lifestyles. The algorithm filters out all the mediocre, boring, and imperfect content that represents what most people actually produce most of the time. This creates an impossible standard where your rough first drafts get compared against other people's polished final products. A beginning writer sees viral posts from established authors and assumes that's the baseline quality they should achieve immediately. Someone learning to cook watches perfectly edited food videos and feels inadequate when their meals don't look professionally photographed. The algorithm doesn't show you the failures, false starts, and learning process that preceded those polished examples. AI assistants have created learned helplessness, where people doubt their ability to make decisions without algorithmic input. ChatGPT can write emails, suggest responses to texts, and even make decisions about what to wear based on the weather forecast. Google can predict your searches before you finish typing them. The more decisions we outsource to artificial intelligence, the less confident we become in our own judgment. Dr. Smith noticed patients who couldn't choose restaurants without reading dozens of reviews, couldn't write simple messages without checking grammar assistance, and couldn't make basic purchases without consulting multiple AI-powered recommendation systems. They had access to more information and assistance than any generation in history, but they felt less capable of independent decision-making than ever before. This creates a generation that's simultaneously overstimulated and undermotivated. They're exposed to constant examples of excellence and optimization that make their own efforts feel inadequate. They have tools that promise to make everything easier, but actually make decisions more complex. They're flooded with information about what they could be doing better, but lack the confidence to start doing anything at all. The perfectionism becomes a protective mechanism. If you never start projects, you never have to confront the gap between your capabilities and the AI-optimized examples you see everywhere. If you spend all your time planning and preparing, you can maintain the illusion that you could create something perfect if you just had the right system, the right tools, or the right moment to begin. Dr. Smith discovered that humor about our imperfections actually breaks the perfectionism cycle by making failure feel human rather than catastrophic. When people can laugh at their mistakes, those mistakes transform from evidence of inadequacy into normal parts of the learning process. Humor provides psychological distance from failure, making it easier to try again without the emotional weight of previous attempts. The neuroscience supports this observation. Laughter activates the prefrontal cortex in ways that enhance cognitive flexibility and reduce the emotional intensity associated with failure. When you can find something funny about your imperfect attempts, your brain processes those experiences as learning rather than threats to your self-worth. This makes it easier to continue trying without the perfectionist need to succeed immediately. 2025 research shows that people who can laugh at their mistakes recover from setbacks 40% faster than those who take their failures seriously. The humor doesn't minimize the importance of improvement or learning from errors. Instead, it prevents the emotional spiral that turns temporary setbacks into evidence of permanent inadequacy. Embracing good enough in an AI-optimized world becomes a radical act of self-care because it requires rejecting the impossible standards that algorithms create through selective presentation of excellence. When you decide that your imperfect blog post is worth publishing, you're choosing authentic expression over algorithmic optimization. When you share work that's not polished to professional standards, you're contributing to a more realistic representation of what human creativity actually looks like. Finding motivation in an age where machines seem to do everything better requires redefining what human contribution means. Machines can generate text, create images, compose music, and solve complex problems, but they can't provide the specific perspective that comes from your unique combination of experiences, values, and circumstances. Your imperfect human take on any topic has value precisely because it's not optimized by algorithms. Your lack of motivation isn't laziness or personal failure. It's your brain protecting you from impossible AI-generated standards of perfection that would crush your confidence if you actually tried to meet them. The solution isn't to lower your standards, but to recognize that human standards and algorithmic standards serve completely different purposes. But this perfectionism paralysis is just one way algorithms have hijacked our psychological systems. The emotional manipulation runs even deeper than most people realize. The mood regulation crisis in our hyperconnected world. People check their mood against social media feeds 47 times per day, according to 2025 data from the Digital Wellness Institute. We've essentially outsourced our emotional regulation to algorithms that have no investment in our actual well-being. Your mood is no longer determined by your circumstances, your relationships, or your internal state. It's determined by whatever content an algorithm decides will keep you scrolling for the next few minutes. Dr. Smith noticed this pattern when patients started describing their emotions in ways that sounded more like social media metrics than genuine feelings. They'd say things like, "I'm having a low engagement day," or "I need some positive content to boost my mood." They weren't just using digital metaphors to describe their feelings. They were actually experiencing emotions that were generated and maintained by algorithmic systems designed to capture attention rather than promote genuine well-being. Constant connectivity has broken our natural mood regulation systems by providing instant but temporary emotional fixes that feel more powerful than the slower, more sustainable emotional processes our brains evolved to use. When you feel sad, you can scroll through funny videos and feel better within minutes. When you feel anxious, you can seek reassurance through social media interactions. When you feel bored, algorithmic feeds provide immediate stimulation. These digital solutions work so quickly that your brain starts to prefer them over the natural emotional processing that takes more time but creates lasting stability. The problem is that these instant emotional fixes don't actually resolve the underlying causes of difficult emotions. They just mask them temporarily while creating dependency on external stimulation for mood management. Your brain learns that uncomfortable emotions should be avoided rather than processed, and that external algorithmic content is more reliable than internal emotional resources for feeling better. AI-curated content creates artificial emotional highs and lows that our brains mistake for genuine feelings because the neurological responses are identical to those triggered by real experiences. When you watch a heartwarming video about strangers helping each other, your brain releases the same oxytocin and endorphins that it would release if you witnessed actual kindness in your real life. When you see distressing news content, your nervous system responds as if you were personally experiencing those threats. Artificial emotions feel authentic because they trigger authentic neurological responses, but they're based on algorithmically selected content rather than your actual life circumstances. Your brain processes the emotional content of what you're consuming as if it were happening to you personally. This creates what Dr. Smith calls emotional contamination, where your mood becomes determined by the emotional content of whatever media you've consumed most recently rather than your actual situation. This emotional contamination creates emotional whiplash, where people's moods change dramatically based on their last notification or post. You can wake up feeling neutral, see an upsetting news headline, feel anxious for an hour, then watch a funny video and feel happy, then see a friend's success post and feel inadequate, all within the span of a few minutes. Your emotional state ping-pongs between algorithmic inputs without any natural emotional processing time. The rapid mood shifts aren't just uncomfortable, they're exhausting. Your nervous system isn't designed to handle emotional changes at the speed that digital content provides them. Natural emotional transitions happen over hours or days, giving your brain time to process and integrate experiences. Algorithmic emotional content forces your brain to constantly recalibrate its emotional baseline without ever reaching a stable state. People have lost the ability to sit with neutral emotions because neutral feels boring compared to the constant stimulation of algorithmic content. Neutral doesn't feel normal anymore. it feels like something's wrong, like you're missing out or not engaged enough with life. The absence of strong emotional stimulation triggers anxiety rather than providing the rest that neutral emotions are supposed to offer. This creates a compulsive need for emotional stimulation that makes people scroll through content not because they're looking for something specific, but because they can't tolerate the emotional neutrality that occurs when they're not consuming algorithmically curated emotional content. They're not just addicted to social media, they're addicted to the artificial emotional states that social media provides. Dr. Smith discovered that humor is one of the few emotions that can't be artificially manufactured by algorithms, because genuine laughter requires human connection, timing, and shared understanding that machines can simulate but not truly create. You can watch funny videos and laugh, but the laughter that creates lasting emotional resilience comes from shared experiences with other people who understand your specific context and circumstances. Laughter creates emotional resilience by teaching our brains that difficult situations can shift perspective quickly without requiring external fixes or avoidance strategies. When you can laugh about something that was recently causing you stress, you're demonstrating to your brain that emotions are temporary and that perspective can change through internal processes rather than external stimulation. This builds confidence in your ability to handle difficult emotions without immediately seeking algorithmic relief. The people who maintain emotional stability despite constant digital input have developed what Dr. Smith calls emotional boundaries with algorithmic content. They recognize when their mood is being influenced by artificial emotional stimulation, and they have strategies for returning to their natural emotional baseline. They can consume digital content without letting it determine their emotional state for the rest of the day. One effective approach involves what Dr. Smith calls emotional fact-checking. When you notice a strong emotional response after consuming digital content, you pause and ask whether the emotion is related to something happening in your actual life or something you just saw on a screen. This simple awareness often reduces the intensity of algorithmic emotional reactions and helps you differentiate between genuine feelings and artificially triggered ones. Your mood swings aren't a character flaw or evidence of emotional instability. They're your emotional system being hijacked by algorithms designed to keep you engaged rather than emotionally healthy. But the influence of these systems extends beyond just our emotions. They've fundamentally altered how we think, creating patterns of mental processing that mirror the very algorithms that shape our digital experiences. Why everyone's overthinking has become algorithmic. Modern overthinking follows predictable patterns because it's being shaped by the same algorithms that organize our digital lives. Dr. Smith noticed this when patients started describing their thought processes in ways that sounded suspiciously similar to search engine results in social media feeds. They would jump from one worry to another in rapid succession, each thought triggering multiple related anxieties that branched out endlessly like a series of algorithmic recommendations. Their mental rumination had adopted the structure of the digital systems they interacted with daily. This isn't coincidental. AI has trained us to expect instant answers to every question, making uncertainty feel more unbearable than ever before. When you type a question into Google, you receive millions of results within milliseconds. When you start typing a message, predictive text suggests how to complete your thoughts. When you pause while writing an email, AI assistants offer to finish your sentences. Your brain has adapted to this environment by becoming intolerant of the natural uncertainty that human thinking requires. Search algorithms and predictive text have changed the way we formulate thoughts, creating what Dr. Smith calls algorithmic thinking patterns. Instead of allowing ideas to develop naturally through reflection and consideration, people now think in keywords and search terms. They frame their internal questions the same way they would frame Google searches, looking for definitive answers to complex human experiences that don't have simple solutions. Your thoughts start to mirror the branching structure of algorithmic recommendations. One worry about work performance leads to concerns about career advancement, which triggers anxiety about financial security, which connects to fears about relationship stability, which loops back to questions about personal worth. Each thought generates multiple related thoughts in the same way that clicking on one video leads to an endless stream of suggested content designed to keep you engaged. People now overthink in loops that mirror the feedback systems of social media platforms. The same psychological mechanisms that make you check for likes and comments create internal cycles where you repeatedly analyze social interactions, replay conversations, and seek validation for decisions you've already made. Your brain applies the engagement metrics of digital platforms to your real-world experiences, constantly evaluating whether your performance met some invisible algorithmic standard. This creates a new form of rumination, where thoughts feel both urgent and meaningless simultaneously. The algorithmic urgency makes every worry feel like it requires immediate attention and resolution. Your brain treats random anxious thoughts with the same priority it gives to notification alerts, creating a sense that everything needs to be processed immediately. But the thoughts themselves often have no real substance or actionable solutions, leaving you mentally exhausted from analyzing problems that don't actually exist. The feedback loops become self-reinforcing because overthinking generates more content for your brain to analyze, just like engaging with social media posts generates more similar content in your feed. The more you think about a problem, the more related problems your brain suggests for consideration. Your overthinking develops its own algorithm that prioritizes anxious thoughts and feeds you increasingly complex variations of the same basic worries. Dr. Smith observed that patients would describe feeling like their thoughts were being controlled by forces outside themselves, similar to how people feel manipulated by social media algorithms. They couldn't understand why certain thoughts kept recurring, or why their mental focus kept shifting to topics that weren't actually important to them. Their internal thought processes had begun following the engagement patterns of algorithmic systems rather than their own conscious priorities and values. The thoughts generated by algorithmic thinking patterns often feel both personally relevant and completely disconnected from reality. Your brain processes social media content about other people's lives and generates worries about your own life based on those external inputs. You see someone's career success post and immediately start overthinking your own professional trajectory. You encounter news about relationship problems and begin analyzing every interaction with your partner for similar warning signs. Traditional overthinking involved real problems and genuine concerns that your brain was trying to solve through repetitive analysis. Algorithmic overthinking involves your brain applying the same analytical processes to artificially generated concerns that were triggered by algorithmic content rather than actual life circumstances. You're overthinking problems that wouldn't exist if you weren't consuming algorithmically curated information about other people's experiences. Dr. Smith discovered that humor interrupts algorithmic thinking because jokes require human creativity and unexpected connections that break the predictable patterns of digital logic. When you find something genuinely funny, your brain has to make cognitive leaps that don't follow algorithmic pathways. Humor requires the kind of creative thinking that algorithms can imitate but not truly generate, forcing your mind out of the linear, branching patterns that characterize digital overthinking. Laughter literally rewires overthinking patterns by forcing the brain out of predictable loops and into spontaneous creative connections. The neural pathways activated by genuine humor are incompatible with the repetitive, circular thinking patterns that characterize algorithmic rumination. When you laugh about something you've been overthinking, you're demonstrating to your brain that there are alternative ways to process the same information that don't require endless analysis and worry. One effective approach involves what Dr. Smith calls thought debugging, where you analyze your overthinking patterns the same way a programmer would debug faulty code. When you notice your mind generating endless variations of the same worry, you can ask whether these thoughts are solving actual problems or just creating more content for mental analysis. This metacognitive approach helps you recognize algorithmic thinking patterns and choose more productive forms of mental processing. Your overthinking feels different now because it is different. Algorithms have literally changed how your brain processes uncertainty, formulates questions, and seeks resolution for complex problems. The solution isn't to think differently about the same internal processes. It's to recognize that your thinking has been influenced by external algorithmic systems and develop strategies for reclaiming more human forms of reflection and problem solving. But recognizing the problem is only the first step. The bigger challenge is finding anxiety management techniques that actually work with these new digital age thought patterns rather than against them. The anxiety management strategies that actually work in 2025. Most anxiety management techniques developed before smartphones show a 23% lower success rate in 2025 compared to their effectiveness in previous decades. The methods that worked for our parents and grandparents simply aren't designed for the specific stresses we face today. Cognitive behavioral therapy protocols developed in the 1970s assumed that anxiety came from internal thought patterns and real-world circumstances. They didn't account for algorithmic manipulation, digital hypervigilance, or the constant low-level stress of living with devices that track our every move and predict our behavior. Dr. Smith discovered this effectiveness gap when patients kept returning to her office, saying that breathing exercises and mindfulness techniques felt impossible to maintain. They'd try the standard 4-7-8 breathing pattern and find their minds immediately pulled back to their phones. They'd attempt traditional meditation and feel more anxious about the notifications they were missing than they felt before starting the practice. The techniques weren't failing because patients lacked willpower. They were failing because they weren't designed for brains that had adapted to constant digital stimulation. Screen time affects our breathing patterns in ways that previous generations of therapists never had to consider. When you focus on a screen, your breathing naturally becomes shallow and rapid. Your nervous system interprets the intense visual focus required for screen use as a mild threat that requires vigilance. Your shoulders tense forward, your chest restricts, and your breathing shifts from deep diaphragmatic patterns to shallow chest breathing. This happens unconsciously every time you look at a phone, computer, or television. The physiological changes compound throughout the day. By evening, most people are breathing in patterns that maintain low-level anxiety, even when they're not actively stressed about anything specific. Their nervous system stays in a state of mild activation that makes traditional relaxation techniques feel forced and unnatural. Standard breathing exercises ask people to breathe deeply when their entire physical posture and muscular tension patterns are optimized for shallow, rapid breathing. Dr. Smith developed updated anxiety management protocols that specifically address algorithmic overwhelm and digital hypervigilance by working with these physical adaptations rather than against them. Her approach starts with screen-specific breathing resets that acknowledge how digital device use has changed our baseline respiratory patterns. Instead of asking people to immediately shift to deep breathing, she teaches techniques that gradually transition from screen-adapted breathing to natural relaxation patterns. The first technique involves what she calls breath bridging. When you notice anxiety after screen use, you don't immediately try to breathe deeply. Instead, you match your current breathing pattern and gradually slow it down over 30 seconds. If you're breathing rapidly and shallowly, you breathe rapidly and shallowly on purpose for 10 breaths, then slow the rate slightly for 10 more breaths, then add a bit more depth for the final 10 breaths. This prevents the jarring transition that makes traditional breathing exercises feel impossible when you're digitally overstimulated. The practical breathing techniques that counteract screen-induced anxiety focus on posture correction and nervous system reset rather than just breath pattern changes. Screen-induced anxiety creates specific muscular tension patterns that restrict breathing even when you're not looking at a screen. Your shoulders roll forward, your neck extends, and your ribcage compresses into positions that make deep breathing mechanically difficult. Dr. Smith's screen recovery breathing starts with posture reset. You pull your shoulders back and down, lift your chest slightly, and imagine lengthening the back of your neck. Only after correcting these postural adaptations do you begin to modify your breathing pattern. The physical positioning change often immediately improves breathing capacity without any conscious effort to breathe differently. Microbreaks from digital input reset the nervous system more effectively than longer meditation sessions because they interrupt the accumulation of digital stress before it becomes overwhelming. A 2-minute break every 30 minutes prevents the buildup of tension and hypervigilance that makes longer relaxation practices feel impossible. These brief interruptions work better than hour-long meditation sessions that people struggle to fit into their schedules and often abandon after a few attempts. The microbreak protocol involves stepping away from screens, looking at something more than 20 feet away, and doing 10 slow shoulder rolls while breathing normally. The distance vision relaxes the eye muscles that become strained from screen focus. The shoulder movement releases the postural tension that accumulates during screen use. The normal breathing prevents the hyperventilation that can occur when people try too hard to breathe deeply when their nervous system is activated. Evidence-based strategies that feel natural in our hyperconnected world acknowledge that complete disconnection from technology isn't realistic or necessary for most people. The goal isn't to eliminate digital device use, but to create conscious transitions between high-stimulation digital activities and low-stimulation recovery periods. This approach feels sustainable because it doesn't require people to choose between technology and mental health. The comprehensive approach builds resilience by teaching people to notice the early physical signs of digital overwhelm before they escalate into full anxiety episodes. Screen-induced anxiety often starts with subtle changes in breathing, posture, and muscle tension that people learn to ignore. Training people to recognize these early warning signs allows them to use simple interventions before their nervous system becomes highly activated and harder to calm. Many people feel like anxiety management doesn't work for them because they're applying techniques designed for pre-digital anxiety patterns to post-digital anxiety experiences. Traditional anxiety often had clear triggers and logical progressions. You worried about a specific upcoming event, and breathing exercises helped calm your nervous system so you could think more clearly about the situation. Digital anxiety is often diffuse, constant, and tied to stimulation patterns rather than specific fears. The anxiety techniques that work in 2025 aren't about disconnecting from technology. They're about changing your relationship with it by understanding how digital device use affects your physiology and developing specific strategies for managing those effects while still engaging with the digital tools that modern life requires. But what Dr. Smith discovered about the most effective approach to digital stress might surprise you completely. How to laugh your way out of digital overwhelm. Laughter offers something that traditional mindfulness simply cannot match for digitally overwhelmed brains. People who use humor to cope with digital stress show significantly better mental health outcomes than those who try to be mindful about technology. This finding surprised Dr. Smith when she first noticed it in her practice, but it makes perfect sense when you understand how digital-age brains actually function. Traditional mindfulness asks people to slow down and focus on single points of attention, which feels torturous for minds that have adapted to constant stimulation. Humor works with these adaptation patterns instead of against them, providing the mental engagement that digitally trained brains crave, while simultaneously creating the psychological distance necessary for emotional regulation. The neuroscience reveals why laughter uniquely interrupts the stress cycles created by constant connectivity. When you laugh, your brain releases endorphins that directly counteract cortisol and adrenaline, the stress hormones that accumulate during extended screen time. More importantly, genuine laughter requires cognitive flexibility that breaks the rigid thinking patterns created by algorithmic feeds. Your brain has to make unexpected connections between ideas, which activates creative neural pathways that remain dormant during passive content consumption. This cognitive flexibility disrupts what Dr. Smith calls digital tunnel vision, the narrow mental focus that develops when your attention gets locked into algorithmic loops. When you find something genuinely funny about your digital experience, you're forcing your brain out of the reactive mode that makes you vulnerable to manipulation. You shift from being a passive recipient of algorithmic content to an active interpreter who can see the absurdity in the system itself. Dr. Smith developed specific humor techniques that help people cultivate healthy skepticism about algorithmic manipulation without becoming cynical or paranoid. One approach involves personifying your devices and apps as characters with their own motivations and quirks. When your phone keeps buzzing with notifications, instead of feeling anxious about missing something important, you can imagine it as an attention-seeking pet that needs constant validation. When Instagram shows you ads for things you were just thinking about, you can picture the algorithm as an overeager friend who thinks they know exactly what you want but usually gets it wrong. This personification technique works because it transforms your relationship with technology from victim and manipulator to human and slightly annoying but harmless digital companion. The algorithm stops feeling like an invisible force controlling your behavior and starts feeling like something you can observe, understand, and even find amusing. You develop the psychological distance necessary to make conscious choices about when to engage and when to step away. Finding the absurdity in our digital predicaments builds psychological resilience by proving to your brain that you can maintain perspective even when surrounded by systems designed to capture your attention. When you can laugh at the fact that your phone knows your location, your shopping habits, your sleep patterns, and probably your mood better than some of your closest friends do, you're demonstrating that you haven't lost your humanity to digital surveillance. The laughter itself becomes evidence that you retain the cognitive freedom to observe and critique the systems you're embedded in. Taking our digital lives too seriously makes us more vulnerable to manipulation and anxiety because it eliminates the psychological distance necessary for critical thinking. When every notification feels urgent and every social media interaction carries emotional weight, you lose the ability to distinguish between genuinely important information and algorithmically generated engagement bait. Seriousness about digital experiences often reflects an unconscious belief that the virtual world is as consequential as the physical world, which gives algorithms more power over your emotional state than they deserve. Practical ways to inject humor into daily digital interactions start with developing what Dr. Smith calls algorithmic literacy through comedy. When you notice your social media feed serving you suspiciously relevant content, you can imagine the algorithm frantically taking notes, like a detective trying to solve the mystery of your preferences. When you see obviously manufactured viral content, you can appreciate the absurdity of millions of people pretending to be spontaneously interested in the same scripted moment. The key is maintaining engagement with digital platforms while refusing to take their content seriously. You can enjoy funny videos without believing that your sense of humor depends on algorithmic recommendations. You can use social media to connect with friends without accepting that your relationships require digital validation. You can consume news and information while recognizing that the presentation and timing of that information is designed to maximize your emotional engagement rather than inform you objectively. Shared laughter about our collective digital struggles creates genuine human connection in ways that serious discussions about technology often fail to achieve. When people can laugh together about their mutual addiction to checking phones, their shared confusion about privacy policies they never read, or their collective participation in social media trends they don't actually understand, they're acknowledging their common humanity in the face of systems that treat them as data points. Humor becomes a daily practice for mental health when you intentionally look for the amusing aspects of digital life, instead of waiting for naturally funny moments to occur. This means actively seeking the irony in targeted advertisements, finding entertainment in the predictability of algorithmic recommendations, and appreciating the comedy in how seriously people take their online personas. The practice shifts your default relationship with technology from reactive consumption to active observation. Laughter might be our most powerful tool for maintaining humanity in an AI-dominated world, because it represents something that remains authentically human, even as machines become better at mimicking other aspects of human behavior. Algorithms can generate jokes, but they cannot experience the joy of shared laughter or the relief of finding humor in difficult situations. Your ability to laugh at the absurdity of modern life isn't just coping. It's actively rewiring your brain for resilience by proving that you can maintain perspective, creativity, and emotional flexibility, even when surrounded by systems designed to eliminate exactly those capacities. But what this means for the future of human psychology might be more significant than anyone realizes. The future of mental health in an AI world. Dr. Smith's research points to a future where psychological flexibility becomes the defining trait for mental wellness, not technical expertise or digital literacy. The humans who thrive in 2025 and beyond won't be the most tech-savvy or the ones who can code or understand machine learning algorithms. They'll be the most psychologically flexible. These are the people who can adapt their thinking patterns, emotional responses, and coping strategies as technology continues to reshape human experience in ways we can't fully predict yet. This psychological flexibility means being able to hold two seemingly contradictory ideas simultaneously. You can appreciate the convenience of AI-powered tools while maintaining skepticism about their influence on your decision-making. You can enjoy social media connections while recognizing that algorithms are manipulating your emotions for profit. You can use technology to enhance your life while refusing to let it define your self-worth or determine your mood. Mental health treatment itself is being revolutionized by AI, creating both incredible opportunities and concerning new challenges that previous generations of therapists never had to consider. AI-driven tools can now analyze sleep patterns, detect sleep disorders, and provide personalized sleep coaching with accuracy that rivals human specialists. These systems can monitor your typing patterns, voice stress levels, and even facial expressions to detect early signs of depression or anxiety before you're consciously aware of them yourself. The opportunities are remarkable. AI therapists like Wobot and Weiser offer conversational assistance through chat-based interactions, using cognitive behavioral techniques to help users navigate anxiety, stress, and emotional fatigue 24 hours a day. These tools never get tired, never judge you for having the same problem repeatedly, and never charge by the hour. They can provide immediate support during panic attacks, offer coping strategies at 3 a.m, and track your emotional patterns over months or years with perfect memory. But the challenges are equally significant. When AI systems know more about your mental health patterns than you do, questions arise about privacy, autonomy, and what happens when those systems are controlled by companies whose primary interest is profit rather than your well-being. The algorithms that power these mental health tools use the same basic architecture as the algorithms that create social media addiction. They're designed to keep you engaged, which isn't always the same as helping you recover. The emerging field of digital psychology specifically addresses the mental health needs of AI-integrated societies by studying problems that didn't exist until recently. Digital psychologists research algorithm addiction, social comparison anxiety, and the psychological effects of living under constant surveillance. They develop interventions for people who can't stop checking their phones, can't make decisions without consulting multiple apps, or experience anxiety when their devices run out of battery. This new field recognizes that traditional therapy techniques often fail when the source of psychological distress comes from systems designed to be psychologically manipulative. You can't treat social media addiction the same way you treat gambling addiction, because social media algorithms adapt to your resistance strategies in real time. The platform learns what makes you want to quit, and adjusts its approach to overcome your defenses. The next generation is developing entirely new coping mechanisms that previous generations couldn't have imagined because they've grown up with these challenges from childhood. They use apps to fight apps, employing digital tools designed to counteract the negative effects of other digital tools. They practice digital minimalism, stripping away optional digital noise like unnecessary apps, platforms, and online habits that don't align with their values, then replacing them with meaningful offline activities. These digital natives also understand something that older generations often miss. They know that the goal isn't to eliminate technology, but to use it intentionally rather than habitually. They can distinguish between technology that serves their purposes and technology that uses them for its purposes. They've developed an intuitive understanding of when they're being manipulated and have created personal strategies for maintaining autonomy in digital environments. The crucial question that determines everything else is whether humans can maintain mental health while becoming increasingly integrated with AI systems. The constant stream of notifications and updates creates a sense of urgency and fear of missing out that leads to increased anxiety and stress. The business model of social media platforms, which involves collecting and selling user data for targeted advertising, exacerbates these problems by treating users as products rather than people. Dr. Smith believes that humor and human connection become more valuable, not less, as AI handles more of our cognitive tasks. Her research shows that humor can interrupt algorithmic thinking because jokes require human creativity and unexpected connections that machines can simulate but not truly generate. Shared laughter about our collective digital struggles creates genuine human connection in ways that algorithmic social media interactions cannot replicate. As AI becomes better at tasks that once required human intelligence, the uniquely human capacities for empathy, creativity, and emotional connection become more rather than less important. AI can write emails, analyze data, and even compose music, but it cannot provide the kind of emotional support that comes from knowing that another human being understands your experience and cares about your well-being. Understanding our relationship with technology today determines our mental health trajectory for decades to come, because the patterns we establish now will shape how we interact with even more sophisticated AI systems in the future. The way we use social media, the boundaries we set with technology, and the coping mechanisms we develop will influence our psychological resilience as artificial intelligence becomes more integrated into every aspect of human life. The exciting possibility exists that we're not victims of technological change, but active participants in shaping a mentally healthier digital future. By being mindful of how social media makes you feel and adjusting your use accordingly, you can minimize harm. This includes setting time limits, curating your feeds, taking breaks, and prioritizing offline activities that promote mental health. These individual choices, when made by millions of people, can influence how technology companies design their products and algorithms. The vision of mental wellness that's emerging doesn't reject technological evolution, but embraces it while maintaining human agency and dignity. This approach recognizes that technology is neither inherently good nor inherently bad, but becomes positive or negative based on how we choose to design, implement, and interact with it. The future of mental health isn't about choosing between human and artificial intelligence. It's about using both to create lives worth living by combining the computational power of machines with the emotional intelligence, creativity, and wisdom that make us human. The question now becomes how to translate these insights into practical strategies that work in your daily life. Your personal action plan for thriving in 2025. Dr. Smith's research gives you tools specifically designed for 2025's unique mental health challenges. Not outdated advice from a pre-digital world that assumes anxiety comes from internal thoughts rather than algorithmic manipulation. Everything we've discussed integrates into a practical framework that acknowledges how technology actually affects your brain instead of pretending you can solve digital age problems with analog-era solutions. The Digital Wellness Protocol starts with algorithmic awareness, which means recognizing when your thoughts, emotions, or behaviors are being influenced by digital systems rather than your actual circumstances. This isn't about becoming paranoid about technology. It's about developing the same awareness of digital influence that you already have about advertising, weather, or other environmental factors that affect your mood and decision-making throughout the day. Each morning begins with a neural reset before you check any devices. This involves 30 seconds of looking out a window or at something more than 20 feet away, 10 slow shoulder rolls to release postural tension that accumulates from screen use, and 5 intentional breaths that match your natural rhythm, rather than forcing deep breathing when your nervous system isn't ready for it. This simple routine counteracts the physiological changes that prepare your body for another day of digital interaction. The morning routine continues with phone-free time for the first hour after waking, which research shows can lower cortisol levels and reduce anxiety while setting a calmer tone for the day. During this hour, you can shower, eat breakfast, or do light movement without the cognitive load of processing notifications, emails, or social media content. Your brain gets to wake up gradually instead of immediately shifting into the hypervigilant state required for digital information processing. Screen interaction throughout the day follows the conscious transition protocol. Before picking up your phone or opening social media, you take 3 seconds to set an intention for what you want to accomplish. This prevents unconscious scrolling that leads to algorithmic rabbit holes and helps you maintain agency over your attention. When you finish using a device, you pause for another 3 seconds to notice how the interaction affected your mood, energy, or thoughts. Notification management involves disabling all non-essential notifications to reduce cognitive fatigue and improve focus. Essential notifications include calls, texts from close contacts, and calendar reminders for scheduled commitments. Non-essential notifications include social media likes, comments, app updates, news alerts, and promotional messages from apps or services. Your brain treats every notification as a potential emergency that requires immediate attention, so reducing them directly decreases the baseline stress your nervous system maintains throughout the day. Sleep optimization for the digital age focuses on content curfews rather than just screen time limits. 2 hours before your intended bedtime, you stop consuming algorithmically curated content like social media feeds, news websites, or streaming platform recommendations. You can still use devices for specific purposes like texting with friends, reading ebooks, or listening to predetermined playlists. The goal is avoiding content designed to capture your attention when your circadian rhythm is trying to wind down for sleep. Humor integration teaches you to actively look for amusing aspects of your digital experiences instead of taking every algorithmic interaction seriously. When you notice your social media feed serving suspiciously relevant content, you can appreciate the absurdity of algorithms trying to read your mind based on your digital breadcrumbs. When you see obviously manufactured viral content, you can find entertainment in recognizing the manipulation attempt rather than getting swept up in artificial emotional responses. Anxiety management for digital overwhelm uses breath bridging whenever you notice stress after screen use. Instead of immediately trying to breathe deeply, you match your current breathing pattern and gradually slow it down over 30 seconds. You breathe rapidly and shallowly on purpose for 10 breaths if that's your current pattern, then slow the rate slightly for 10 more breaths, then add depth for the final 10 breaths. This prevents the jarring transition that makes traditional breathing exercises feel impossible when you're digitally overstimulated. Physical posture reset becomes crucial because screen use creates specific muscular tension patterns that restrict breathing and maintain anxiety, even when you're not actively using devices. Every 2 hours during screen-heavy days, you pull your shoulders back and down, lift your chest slightly, and imagine lengthening the back of your neck. This counteracts the forward head posture and shoulder rounding that occurs during device use and immediately improves your breathing capacity without conscious effort. The micro-break system involves stepping away from screens every 30 minutes for 2-minute intervals that reset your nervous system before digital stress accumulates to overwhelming levels. During these breaks, you look at something more than 20 feet away to relax your eye muscles, do 10 slow shoulder rolls to release postural tension, and breathe normally without trying to control your breath pattern. These brief interruptions prevent the buildup of hypervigilance that makes longer relaxation practices feel forced. Emotional fact-checking helps you distinguish between genuine feelings and artificially triggered responses to algorithmic content. When you notice a strong emotional response after consuming digital content, you pause and ask whether the emotion relates to something happening in your actual life or something you saw on a screen. This simple awareness often reduces the intensity of algorithmic emotional reactions and helps you maintain emotional autonomy in a hyperconnected world. The implementation strategy focuses on choosing one component to practice for a week before adding additional elements. Most people try to change everything simultaneously and abandon the entire protocol when they can't maintain perfect consistency. Starting with just morning phone-free time, or just the breathing reset allows you to build sustainable habits gradually, instead of creating another source of perfectionist pressure. Small, consistent changes in how you interact with technology create massive improvements in mental health, because they address the root causes of digital age anxiety rather than just managing symptoms. When you change your relationship with algorithmic systems, you reclaim psychological autonomy that affects every aspect of your daily experience. You don't need to become a digital hermit to protect your mental health. You just need to become a conscious digital citizen who understands how technology affects your psychology and makes intentional choices about when and how to engage with systems that have their own agenda for your attention and emotional state. The real test of these strategies isn't whether they work in isolation, but whether they help you maintain something essentially human in a world increasingly designed by machines. The strategies we've explored represent more than just coping mechanisms for digital overwhelm. They're tools for reclaiming psychological autonomy in an age where algorithms increasingly shape human behavior and thought patterns. Our ability to laugh at the absurdity of living with AI while taking our mental health seriously might be the most human thing we can do. When you can find humor in your phone predicting your thoughts or algorithms knowing your mood better than your friends do, you're proving that you haven't lost your humanity to digital systems. Start with just one small change today. Maybe it's putting your phone away for the first hour after waking up, or taking 3 conscious breaths before opening social media. These tiny shifts create ripple effects that transform your entire relationship with technology, building toward a future where humans and AI enhance each other's capabilities instead of competing for control.